back to Then and Now, the weekly show I do with George Jatras, author of I Try to Warn You, available at Amazon and all your fine bookstores, also on Kindle, links in the description below. We are joined this week by Charles Bausman, who's a journalist, former J6 refugee who's living in Russia, and the creator and author of Russia Insider. He's also his Substack is named Arc Substack, or the Arc Substack.
Yeah, Arc Russia. You can find it on my Twitter profile. I'm on Twitter at
Bausman.
Bausman.
Links are down there as well. And of course, I'm Jason MIRONCHUK, your host with the most. Send us your super chats and your money over in Streamlabs. We are a host. We are a audience supported show. We have a $2,000 goal to get to. So any and all money you can send our way is always appreciated. And likes and share and subscribe and let the people know where we at. Okay, gentlemen. This week, a few things to talk about. It's been a relatively active little week over in your country, of course, and then what's not being reported often now is it's a Russian offensive. The Russians are seemingly getting serious after those attacks on their nuclear installations by the Ukrainians. They've launched massive drone attacks, missile attacks, and more incursions into Ukraine. Notably, many places in Kiev were lit up on fire over the last 24 hours. Odessa has been struck. The Russians have made entry into Dnipro, which is they seem to be getting towards the Dnieper River to kind of cut off a large section of Ukraine. More attacks in Sumy region. More of everything, really. And the dialogue out of Russia seems to be that they're going to finish this thing fairly, very quickly. More reports out of Ukraine of the Ukrainian lines completely collapsing in multiple regions. There's speculation that Ukraine has basically run out of money, and manpower is dwindling, as we've been detailing for months now. I think that's finally coming to fruition. And of course, that's all being covered. That's all being sidelined or page sixed by the goings on in America. There seems to be an insurrection, perhaps a color revolution, whatever you want to call it. Multiple outbreaks across America. So, of course, starting in LA. Now we're seeing reports in New York City, in Boston, Chicago, and a few other places in the United States of protests turning ugly. So, gentlemen, where would you like to start?
Well, you're the one who just got back from Russia a month ago,
yeah.
And your impressions there are a little fresher than ours. What insight can you provide on anything that Jason just said?
Regarding the military situation, I can't really provide any insight because, to me, as a consumer of this information, I find it almost impossible to evaluate. And I think the only people who really know what's happening on the battlefields are the militaries involved. And they're certainly not inclined to tell the truth because they need to slant it in their own way. So I know a lot of people are being very optimistic about these Russian advances, but, call me a skeptic. I've been hearing these predictions of like massive Russian advances for, what is it?
Three years.
So,
3 months.
Obviously, I hope it's true. I very much want Russia to win this and clean it up, but until I see hard evidence of that happening, I would hold off on my optimism.
Well, Charles, one thing you can speak of directly is the mood in Russia, because you were there for at least a few months.
Mm-hmm.
What's the general mood from the people on the ground, like the actual Russian citizens? I don't know if you got any in-depth conversations about this. It might have been a bit of a tricky one.
Oh, sure. That I can certainly talk about. It's extremely supportive. There is almost no, morale fatigue. There is like a sincere wish and a desire for peace because people are very tired of this going on for so long, but they still believe that Russia is absolutely right. And there are, 90% behind the government. So the support is extraordinary. Patriotism is high. And there's no sign of any kind of public weariness not to continue fighting. And in fact, the more like bad things happen to Russia, like, you know, drone attacks on Moscow or these endless rocket attacks into Belgorod and Kursk and things like that, the more determined the broader mass of Russian people is to just fight it out. And that goes down to the Russian mentality. They are fighters, and they've been fighting for 1,000 years. You know, it's their history is just all about being at war most of the time. So they're very, very different than Westerners in that respect.
Jim, any thoughts on the incursion stuff? Oh, sorry, incursion stuff. The buildup, the military buildup. I mean, we've been talking about this for months now, really, for years separately, about, you know, when will Russia get serious? This certainly seems like that. Although I also think it's, as we're seeing this play out, it also kind of confirms our suspicion that perhaps the Russian objective was to just kill as many Ukrainians as possible.
Yeah, or that is the proximate way to get to a collapse of the Ukrainian state and army. You know, there's an account on Twitter, X, that did a calculation of when the Ukrainian manpower would reach zero at the current rate of attrition and recruitment, and it put it somewhere around August of 2027, but it's predicted that the collapse would happen much sooner than zero. It'd be more likely to be when you get to the 50% point, which would be around August of 2026. And you do hear people, again, I'm not going to mention names because I don't like to make this personal, who do talk about, you know, sticking to the game plan. We'll just keep continuing with this. Eventually they'll collapse. We can do this for months. We can do this for years. We can do blah, blah, blah. I hope to God that's not what they're thinking. I mean, we, you know, right after those attacks occurred in Bryansk and then on this Russian strategic forces, we heard so many people saying, all right, you know, can you bar the door? They're going to change their tactics. And maybe they're right. Did you mention about what Scott Ritter said about 80 arrests? I mean, again, they've got, by all accounts, or at least the ones that seem to matter, the technology to target the, essentially, you might call the, you know, the nerve center, the medulla oblongata, the regime itself, which they have thus far refrained from doing. And of course, some people have looked at the Bryansk attack and say, well, all this talk of terrorism, that's a legal twist to refocus the thing from an SMO to a counterterrorism, a CMO, and that they will start targeting the leadership of the Ukrainian state, maybe including Zelensky himself. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. My guess is they probably will not. Maybe they will, but I think there's just too much where they're hesitant to escalate in a way they see could be dangerous. Although I think, again, as I've said many times before, when you're dealing with a monkey with a hand grenade, what's dangerous is drawing it out and giving the monkey more opportunities rather than just, you know, knocking the grenade out of the monkey's hand. So I don't think they'll do that. I also think that they still, at some level, are holding out on the mirage of a negotiated settlement, which is never going to come. And so I think this will continue for a while. And I think, you know, just between you and me, Jason, nobody else is listening, I don't think, this is unconscionable. This is unconscionable to fight a war that is based on just wiping out the country's manpower, where I don't think that's strategically necessary. If that were the only way to win the war, you know, it is what it is. But I just don't see that. And again, I'm not a military expert, but it seems to me this is a political judgment, not a military judgment.
Yeah, I mean, I think was listening to Scott Ritter talk about a few things, and one of the things he mentioned was, you know, this is a special military operation, which maybe is why, coming from a Western perspective, we're analyzing it wrong on some level. That Putin and co might be looking at it saying they want to have a managed collapse, especially is because they don't want all of a sudden Ukraine to shift to Lvov and then become, you know, a Polish area and then be fighting the Poles on top of everything else. So that might factor into it as well. Although
I think
the Ukrainians could shift that anyways.
I would say that's kind of bass backwards. I mean, it seems to me that the best thing would be is if the Ukrainian state collapsed and the government retreated to Lvov, and the Russians made it clear, yeah, fine, our line of interest stops here. Do whatever you want in Lvov. You and the Poles can have fun in that sandbox. I'm sure the Poles would be thrilled. But it's I just don't see. Again, but on the other hand, I think you're right. There is some concern. Yeah, I think there's still something in their mentality that says we are better off negotiating a deal with somebody rather than having to simply impose your will by force. And I think, in my opinion, that's a mistake. I think it's a political miscalculation, not a military one.
But aren't they also very wary of triggering a NATO reaction?
Exactly. I think
that's one of the reasons why they're going so slow. Because, and then there's also the issue that rapid advances are incredibly costly in terms of manpower.
And I'm not talking about rapid advances.
Given the
drones and all that.
Given the drones, I mean, you almost can't launch major military offenses anymore.
Yeah. How is it that the Ukrainians managed to do it in Kyrgyzstan?
Yeah, and they got slaughtered.
Yeah, I know that. But I guess what I'm saying is this. First off, I'm not saying storm cities. I'm not saying big aerial offenses. I'm not saying like that. I'm saying, why is it hands off Zelensky, the Rada, the SBU, the whole structure of the Ukrainian state has been treated like it's immune from the war?
Yeah.
So that's a political calculation.
But if they knocked out those guys, a new batch would come.
Would they?
And then they might even have more credibility than Zelensky.
Then you kill them too. There was somebody's got to. It was if you could, so to speak, kill Hitler and kill off the SS and kill off the Gestapo. At some point, the state ceases to function. If the Ukrainians could kill Putin, they would.
But Zelensky is no Hitler. And he's no Putin.
I'm making an analogy here. What I'm saying is I'm not saying Zelensky personally.
He's not some sort of like essential leader to the country.
I'm saying, but there is a leadership there. It's a collective leadership. It's composed of the Azov people and all that. There are people who run that state, and their foreign supporters are also there in Kiev.
Yeah.
And but I'm saying, why? Back to what Jason was saying about killing off all these men. Why are you killing so many poor schnooks that are being sent to the front who don't want to go, and the guys who are sending them there are left immune? Back to your other point, though. Yes, I am sure exactly that's what the Russians are worried about. If we do X, Y, and Z, NATO will panic and get into the war directly, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that, again, is a woeful political miscalculation. Because, yes, that risk does exist, but the bigger risk is the longer you draw this thing out, the more likely the other side is to do something really responsible, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks.
Kenneth Wells with $5 asked the question, is it possible that the war has been dragged out so long in order to damage the bond markets and general investments made by NATO nations? I'll rephrase it a little bit because I do think there's something to be said there, because it might be another strat is to, Russia understands that it's actually at war with NATO as much as it's war with Ukraine. Ukraine is just a proxy state.
And you want to bring down the whole thing, sure, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there might be a very good strat of bleeding out, making this sort of NATO's Vietnam, where they just bleed them out until they start buckling. We've already started seeing now reports out of Germany. I just did a stream about this recently. Mm-hmm. Now it's finally being released in the mainstream press everywhere, and I was detailing this all the way back in December of last year, that the bankruptcy rate in Germany is now terminal. Their economy is now it's pretty close to complete collapse. They've also made statements now on a defense ministry level, saying that they don't have enough men or manpower or defenses to defend much more of Germany than just Berlin. So if Russia basically wanted to invade Germany, they could easily. Not saying that they're going to do that or that's what the Russians want, but Germany's been deindustrialized to the point where it's starting to collapse. Japan is also in a horrible state of affairs. Right. Their bankruptcy rates and their finances are now massively in flux. We already know the UK has been saying things like Liz Truss came out not too long ago saying that they're in a death spiral. And we have UK. We're starting to see problems breaking out in Ireland, just north of Dublin. There was fire bombings on immigrants who did some horrible things to a young Irish girl. And now certainly there's violence in the streets. I think that's going to we're on a countdown until we start seeing that happen in London. lots of reports, not confirmed, but just people talking online saying a lot of big money is now leaving London. So a lot of people are just getting up and going.
Where's it going?
So, well, good question, right? Maybe Spain? Who knows? On a holiday? Gibraltar sounds nice.
I don't think Spain.
No.
And I can see that part of the strategy, but then I also ask the political question, which would be more destabilizing to those broader structures, drawing this thing out further, or a sharp, decisive defeat where NATO is shown no longer to be the security hegemon in Europe. And again, that's a political question.
And Charles, I'll throw this over to you, but I think in these analysis, we get into sort of Saturday morning cartoon stuff where, because this is happening, then we apply a logic to what is happening. There might be a logic or a plan, but to say that the Russian plan is to say, let's elongate this war to 3 or 4 years, and that's the plan. Like, there's a lot of things that could go wrong in 3 to 4 years that you can't plan for. So it's gone on for this long, and we're trying to rationalize it out as best we can. I still think the only rationale that makes sense to me at the end of the day is kill as many Ukrainians, completely denazify Ukraine by removing all potential combatants from Ukraine for a generation or two. That seems to be the only thing we keep coming back to that makes any lick of sense.
Yeah, and I think the worry. I mean, I agree that NATO is in absolutely no condition to fight Russia at this point. But there are people in the leadership of NATO countries who would be willing to get into a war with Russia. And so what they would do is they would put some sort of men on the ground in Ukraine. Those men would get destroyed, but then you could justify a state of war and whip up war fever in your own country, and then you sort of like spend a couple of years massively increasing, building up your military while keeping the state of war. It's like at the beginning of World War II, there was this so-called phony war where the Germans were dominating everything, and the Allies were sort of gearing up for a big, long fight. And so I think there are people in the command structure in the West who would like that, and they would like to be in a state of war with Russia because it would allow them then to crack down on the populations, ramp up their militaries, and then fight a nice big war.
I think all of that is exactly the concern that I have. I just think that danger is greater the longer this is drawn out rather than the other way around. I mean, I think, again, it's a political question. Which is more likely to generate that kind of reaction on NATO's part? A sudden end where the window closes and they either have to be crazy enough to attack Russia or not, or giving them opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to escalate incrementally, which is what they've been doing all along. And again, it's a legitimate disagreement.
Well, so we know that China's now suspended drone manufacturing or drone trade to Ukraine, while intensifying drone material shipments to Russia. Russia's now building 2 new plants. They have one in central Russia, one out in Siberia, closer to China, that they're going to be shipping parts out. The idea is to start generating hundreds, if not thousands, of drones constantly. Other reports of the Russian defense is that they're building up Russia's stockpiling now munitions and arms, but they're doing it on from the back end. Like, they're not bringing it to the front. So they seem to be also sort of gearing up for a very long, more of a war of attrition with NATO, the West, who knows who, Turkey possibly. We haven't mentioned their name in a bit. That seems to be most likely. So I think now, even with the Reshetnik and Russian arms, if we do start to see Russia put on a showcase of arms to basically bring some sort of end to this form of aggression, I think the most likely scenario is that it puts us into a new Cold War.
I think that's going to happen no matter what happens in this war. I think we're looking at that. Again, I think if it is a decisive victory that ends American hegemony in Europe, that Cold War will probably be of shorter duration because it will probably lead to an earlier collapse of the kind of governments we have in Europe now that will then force some sort of rapprochement with Moscow and maybe a decoupling from the United States. If, on the other hand, this thing comes out, again, both giving them time to build up or settling it on some terms that's less than a decisive Russian victory, I think that then preserves the American hand in Europe and our ability to prop up these kind of governments that exist in Europe today.
Charles?
Well, yeah. So we should add that as another reason why the Russians are going slow, because I think they don't want this future Cold War.
There's no way to avoid it one way or the other. I'm saying if they got it over faster, the likelihood of a short Cold War is much greater if they basically allow this thing to be drawn out, let the Europeans gear up and settle for something less than a full loaf, then it will be a Cold War and it'll go on for a very long time. That's what I'm saying. Maybe give me the counter argument on that.
But for example, if there were a peace agreement along the lines of what Trump was trying to negotiate a couple months ago, it seemed to be the consensus that part of the agreement would be normalization of relations, and we all get to be friends again, and like life returns to normal. Like there'd be like hostility, hostility after that.
Well, except that you got to keep in mind, any agreement to end this war would not be honored by the Western side. It would be another Minsk agreement. In other words, they could agree to those terms, and those terms would not be honored.
Yeah, but
like, for example, we'll agree to lift sanctions, but they won't lift the sanctions. So on and so forth.
Yeah, but I mean, weren't the Russians making very clear that we're not going to agree to anything that requires you guys keeping your word? We want guarantees.
Well, okay, what kind of guarantee?
Well, for one thing, security ones that are locked in and would prevent the Ukraine from ever being a staging area against Russia.
For example, what kind of guarantee? NATO. Like what?
What, demilitarizing the Ukraine?
Okay, we'll agree to that. We'll agree to that. We won't do it, but we'll agree to it.
Dropping of sanctions.
Well, okay, there's one, obviously, that does rely on a promise. Which, unless the Russians, you have to drop all of your sanctions before we even agree to a ceasefire. The Russians have said, we want an agreement that points to the end game, ending the root causes, and then we will agree to a ceasefire as a means to get there, right? At some point, unless you're going to continue the war until every sanction in the world against Russia is dropped, you have to rely on part of the agreement as, okay, we agree to drop the sanctions.
Okay, recognition of the territories, Crimea and so on.
Sure.
Is that a promise, or is that
I think
they can go back on?
They can go back on, sure.
Okay.
And they could promise to lift the sanctions and then not lift the sanctions. How long did it take them to get rid of Jackson Vanik?
Or they can lift the sanctions and put them back on.
They could do that too. Sure. Yeah.
Well,
remember, the first thing will happen as soon as there's a ceasefire under whatever terms, the other side will accuse the Russians of violating the ceasefire.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why we get into a Cold War scenario. Is the most likely end point of this. Let's say Russia does start deploying Oreshniks, right? Starts deploying supersonic missiles, or maybe got some new fancy thing that's not atomic. They're not nukes. They're not breaking any treaties, but they're doing devastating damage, and they show that off to the world, where they level out some cities. Which again, I don't think is what Russia wants to do, but in terms of being able to put on display that could put at least Europe and NATO and the rest of them on their back heel a little bit and say, look, you're never going to do this again, for the next 10 years or so, because we're also getting reports that, Europe doesn't have any response to these supersonics. The European ability to start building munitions is laughable at this point. Europe's got a lot of problems.
I don't think anybody believes that's going to happen, actually.
Right, exactly. They're going to depend on America, and right now, America's got a lot of problems. I don't think the timing is completely coincidental, but that we can maybe shift to that conversation, because now, of course, we have multiple outbreaks across America, specifically in LA. Trump has now mobilized both the National Guard and has put a bunch of Marines in play in LA to deal with rioters. The mayor of LA has just called a curfew finally, because I guess all the images of broken into storefronts and looters and rioters and all the rest of it is starting to look a little bit bad. And a judge has just overturned Gavin Newsom's attempt to stop the National Guard from being federalized. So it looks like it's going to be a bit of a boogaloo this summer, boys.
Wait, I heard that word somewhere.
Yeah. I just want to read out this one. It was one comment by Mr. Anonymous. He says, "My normie Gen Z co-workers aren't anti-Russian. They think Zog and China are enemies. Putin is just the uncle that punched your dad in the throat, but your dad had been drinking at the barbecue." I thought.
By the way, I have to take issue with your saying riots all over America. As you know, Los Angeles is occupied Aztlan, and being liberated by its rightful owners, as you might know.
Right, exactly. Yeah, new borders are being proposed. A new wall by a Mexican parliamentary leader. He's the president of the parliament or something like that.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. That's a good move. Smart one. Yeah, just poke the bear. So let's see what happens. Because I think I don't think Americans would go overseas to fight for Israel or Russia right now. I think they damn well go over to Florida and fight for the border, though. Sorry, go to California and fight for the border. I think you could mobilize a whole bunch of people that way, which gets interesting. But either way, this is dominating the news, of course, right now, and it looks like America's interests are shifting to domestic policy rather than international. So. Any thoughts on that, gentlemen? And of course, we can get into Charles. You have direct experience with insurrections or being called an insurrectionist, so we can always get to that as well.
Yeah, I don't. I'm sorry, but I maybe I haven't been back long enough, but I just don't have a strong opinion about what's going on in LA. I mean, part of it looks like wildly exaggerated. Okay, so there's some neighborhoods where some Latinos are running around burning stuff, but how big is it? How important? It looks like a lot of political theater to me on both sides.
Well, we've been told by the liberal press that this is just what happens after a sporting event in LA all the time. So people blocking up freeways.
I was going to say, for all I know, it's possible.
Might be an example of the liberal press
no, but
telling the truth.
It's not just in Los Angeles. I mean, it's a number of cities around the country. And it appears to be coordinated as well. I mean, again, this looks to me like BLM, Summer of Floyd all over again, probably with a lot of the same suspects doing the organizing. And I think there are a couple of issues here. One is Trump is sending in the National Guard, and I think in one case Marines, but these people are not trained for crowd control or equipped for it. I mean, something really, really nasty is going to happen. But like if you will, a Kent State kind of thing, where Trump is going to be turned into Slobodan Milosevic or somebody. I think that's part of the scenario here.
I think that's certainly the liberal perspective that's what's going to happen. However, I think the mood from what I've been able to discern, the mood in America is shifting. As I've said, the spirit of this new age is the spirit of the vengeful son. So it's not going to be the same thing we've been dealing with for the last 60 years. It's a new thing, and there seems to be an activation, especially with Gen Z and younger men, who are very on board with this. And there's been sort of I think a very quiet and silent, even a lot of relatively far left or progressive commentators are doing their best to say it in their own limited way, like, yeah, this looks bad. Guys, maybe stop waving around the Mexican flags while standing on burning cars. This is making us look bad. So even their response is different than it was.
Israeli flags, then they'd be supported by all the Republicans.
Who was somebody saying that the only 4 flags that are really you can wave in the United States today are the Israeli flag, the Palestinian flag, the rainbow flag, and there was one other one. Was the Ukrainian flag? I forget which one. It wasn't the American flag. I blame Canada.
Never. Well, you should. Maybe you can start waving the Canadian flag around. Maybe that's the next one. Maybe that will. It's Canada. You're gonna have to wait till it gets colder, and then you can start. You can start the Canadian insurrection, taking back Maine or Vermont. And we'll see how that goes. I guess Northern California, BC, that could happen.
But can you expand a little bit on the Vengeful Son thing? Because I can understand there are a lot of lumpen Americanos who are fed up and have had enough, especially younger males. But what are they actually in a position to do about anything? I mean, if things start to get kinetic out there, I don't see a whole bunch of Hawaiian shirt-clad boogaloo boys out there, wreaking mayhem. And it seems to me the law enforcement authorities, I don't know how reliable they are either in the face of ethnically based violence, because then they're subject to charges of racism, and all the the white liberal women will be all upset. I don't see that kind of consciousness among what's left of an American national identity.
Well, so I'm Mel is saying MIRONCHUCK loves this question. He's champing at the bit. So the way I look at it is
let him have it. Let him have it, Jason.
That this age will not just be kinetic violence. Of course, there will be kinetic violence and responses to it, right? And I think the left right now, progressives, whatever, are doing most of the violence, and that's going to beggar responses. I think we're going to start seeing a lot of Palantir tech. Laura Loomer put out a tweet recently, saying, "Oh, we should, showcase some Palantir tech in California," and that's a little spooky because now you have technology that can start pinpointing people. That masks won't matter, because during the lockdowns in COVID, one of the reasons why they're saying wear masks is now they can get retinal data off you, so they can pinpoint you off your eyes. So now as that gets pinpointed, and I think that's kind of maybe why we see the Marines there, we're going to start seeing some domestic. We're going to start seeing some of the stuff that Israel should have been doing in Gaza being done in California, and it's going to be more pinpointed and much more searchable. So there's that response. But I also think on the ground level, where we're entering into is an age of total violence. So it won't just be kinetic. It won't be just burning down buildings or punching people. It will be the good examples like game stonks back in 2020, when a bunch of anons shorted the shorters and started to bleed out hedge funds over game stonks and AMC and that kind of things. And one interview where I remember one of the guys was interviewed and said, if you keep holding your stonks, you're going to lose everything. And he's like, I don't care. It's hurting the hedge funds, and they hurt my dad back in 2008. It's here to hurt them. And it's that spirit of vengeance that's coming through the pipe. You see people responding to Martyr Maid and revelations of the undoing some of the post Nuremberg regime narratives, and re-looking at a lot of these things, and an awareness that there's betrayal going on, that we've been lied to, and people are getting, I was part of those distance circles for a long time, and very quietly you saw people go through this sort of arc, but that's been over the last 5+ years. A lot of other people are getting onboarded to this immediately, and anti-Israel sentiment is at a peak that's I've never seen before, amongst boomers, normal people, suddenly kind of cottoning on, going, this isn't what we wanted, this isn't what we intended. LGBTQ stuff is now on the back foot. Have you heard anything about Pride recently? Interesting, right?
And it's Pride Month too. It's Pride Month.
You wouldn't even know.
Month. It's more Christian.
Yeah, exactly. You wouldn't even know, would you?
Can you go back to Palantir for a second? Because I've heard the suggestion that this is largely for that purpose, and that frankly everybody from Trump to Chucky Schumer will be wanting to put this scheme into effect, with only the resistance in Congress will be next to zero. A few on the right, a few on the far left, and that'll be it.
They have no choice. It's in their system now. So when Elon did Doge, he went into all their systems and sort of they were in there and uploading their files. So and then it was announced that Grok and Palantir are partnered. So
oh really?
So my suspicion, because it hasn't been fully announced yet, but my suspicion.
So wait. Let me get this straight. So Elon Musk is defecting from Trump to Peter Thiel.
He was always with Peter Thiel. I think that whole Trump Elon thing was just media cover to kind of get us to this.
Jason, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
We were talking over dinner here this evening, and I discovered that Jim is very pessimistic about the future of America. He thinks
you just discovered that.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. You know?
You just made Buck Johnson do a spit take. You know that, right?
So, and that there's just nothing that can be done. It's not going to be. It's not savable. It's like late stage USSR. It's just going down, and there's nothing anybody can really do about it. And I'm not quite there yet. I'm just wondering whether you.
Well, no, but before run with that a second, because you see some hope in Musk's calling for an 80% of the people third party.
Well, that's an example, right? When Musk was talking about starting the third party, I was like, yeah, do it, please. That's what we need. And I still do believe that if like some rational people like the cavalry the rational cavalry rode in, convinced the American people that, hey, we got to do this, that things could be turned around.
Well, I think
what do you think? Do you think there's any hope for America?
He's a foreigner.
To answer your question, and we got confirmation. Buck said yes, he did get a stick take. $5 from Kenneth Wells. The vengeful son violence may also be akin to narcissistic injury. Yeah, it's going to be violence across many domains. Mm-hmm. It's going to be more, like I said, like a spirit. It's just as much as I said the last 60 years has been the spirit of the devouring mother, sort of inverted femininity. So it's femininity in all aspects that's been inverted, and sort of like it permeates the culture. So we see it in all ways. It affects everyone in different ways, but it's there. I think that vengeful son sort of idea to rip things down, tear it down, that Peter, that Gen X iconoclastic desire to to assert oneself is going to be on the forefront. It's going to be very youthful in terms of think of a teenage boy, right? Or teenage boy, early 20s male who's just asserting himself in one way or another. So to your point, I think what's been going on is that we have a lack of order. We've been running off of this mercantile liberalism system for multiple hundreds of years now. It certainly benefited a more mercantile country like London and the British Empire, but that's changing now because the idea of globalization and global markets and stuff has now been proven to be a white elephant. So these things are being reshored and brought back home. And to that point, now we have to have order. There was a great tweet recently, someone basically making a difference between the trad right and the tech right, or the tech pros, right? So the PayPal mafia, some of that Matt Erickson and I have talked about so often. They can't have the future they want now that we saw the attacks in California with the Weeboos, right? The Google's driverless taxis and that. They've had a recall of them because they were being attacked and destroyed. So it's like, if you want to have your big tech future with driverless cars and all your beautiful tech, every city is Singapore kind of thing, you can't have it without order. And you can't have that order without a strong tradition and all these other things that certainly are being represented in the more traditional trad calf, trad right, whatever term you want to use, dissonant right. A lot of these people are proposing. So that has to happen. I guess to answer your question, Charles, is that I don't believe that. I think the America or the countries we used to know, like Canada, one of the things when I moved out here to bring my family, to bring my daughter closer to my wife's family, but it was also, it made it easier because I realized the Canada that I knew, it no longer exists. It's gone. It's finished. It will never return. Now there might be hope for Canada, a future Canada, something that I don't know what that is, sure, but holding on to what was is not going to get you anywhere, and it's certainly only going to substantiate more and more of what we have right now. So I think this is a Charles Padil point, but what's happening is very quietly, women are turning to their men in one way, shape, or form and saying, "Fix it. I don't care how you do it. I don't care how it's done. Just go out there and fix it." And that "fix it" kind of energy is permeating. And I think you're going to start seeing people start fixing it. Men are going to start fixing this. And I don't know how bloody that's going to get.
So
But
you're not as pessimistic as Jim.
I'm not pessimistic at all. I think
he's optimistic about oceans of blood. That's much more optimistic.
Well, I mean,
I think,
you know what I'm trying to say,
I think we're going to see
America
an order emerge.
Fixable, or is it going to go down, basically?
Well, what's fixed? I mean, I guess the question, is what is the category of America, right? What are you trying to save? What is this thing you want?
Exactly.
Right? Because if you want 1950s America, that's never going to happen again. That's gone. But if you want an ordered country, that can happen. The question is, how is it going to happen? Because then you start getting into technologies
for example, Russia came back after complete collapse and then humiliation and just like madness for 10 years, and then somehow out of that, like it reconstituted itself. So I guess it doesn't take that.
No, that's exactly my point.
It's a great example, but
that the Soviet Union with Russia as its major component went through that. The Soviet system as it was could not be saved, just like I think America as a state cannot be saved. But there was still a self-aware Russian nation, a people that had a set of values, an identity, a language, and so on and so forth. And they were able to build something like a Russia coming out of those ashes. My question in America is there a self-aware American people, an ethnos, that's capable of reconstituting something after that collapse occurs? And
just quickly, I think the thing that America lacks is religion, like a real religion, because it's Protestant.
I think that's part of it.
It's a scattershot Protestantisms that are leading to a lot of this sort of tectonic issue. I've been working on this concept called civilizational capital, and one major component to that is something I call a regio. So it's three things you have to have. You have to have a ruler, you have to have a region, which includes the people, and you have to have a religion. And that has to be definitive to the people who are living there. That galvanizes people. It's like the glue. So now in Russia, to your example, post, as soon as Putin gets in, now you have your ruler, now you have your region, and you have your people, and you have your religion. Because by making it Orthodox, suddenly now it's a real deal religion, and people can understand. They create borders, right? And once you have borders, then you can start creating order. You have to have borders. You have to have, in order to have order, you have to have borders, and you have to have borders both internally and externally.
Jason, there's one problem with that metaphor or structure or whatever, and that is that most Russians are not religious. In fact, man for man, America is a more Christian country than Russia is.
If you're counting non-Orthodox, sure. If you're counting non-Orthodox, sure.
Where in
America?
Yeah. Yes, but
I'm saying how unifying is religion in America anymore anyway?
Yeah, but in Russia, it's still to this day not that many people are very religious.
Well, not that many people were communist either, and they had a communist system in power for 3 generations.
Well, no, a lot more people were communists than are Christian today.
I don't think that's true.
Well,
it's absolutely true.
But I don't think we can. I don't think we can do a 1-to-1 though, right? Because here's the thing. Here's just really briefly. It would 10 Orthodox Christians be worth 100 evangelical charismatics?
Sure.
Faith-wise.
Yeah, that's true, but I'm talking about in percentages of population. Basically, Russia turned itself around without having a majority of the country being.
Nobody said anything about a majority. There was
being particularly religious.
The ethos was there.
There was a religion that was like presented as this is our religion,
exactly.
But in fact, like 90% of the people like barely knew anything
I don't think
that
contradicts his point. If at the state level, again back to his first 2 R's, that you have a ruler and a territory, and there is put forth a national vision based on religion, even if not a lot of people practice it or share it, but they do share the identity. I mean, a lot of English people, for example, have never set foot in a church, but they still identify with the Church of England as a national.
I think it's a recognition point because
Yeah.
And to build off what Jim's saying is that right now, I just saw an ad about this. They have billboards in Russia. Maybe you saw this when you were out there, Charles, which are advertising commemorating the ascension. And it just keeps playing, and apparently they have them all year round, right? It's in the background. These things work on you. So, and again, it's to give structure. So the idea is like, what is Russia? Well, Russia, in the minds now of people post-Soviet Union, one of the things you can say is it's an Orthodox country. Now, maybe you're not Orthodox, or you don't go to church on Sunday. Too bad for you. But
the church I'm not going to is the Orthodox Church, and that's what matters.
Right. It's not Muslim. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not just vagueness. And it gets into the structure of. I mean, we haven't talked about end results for Russia. Novorossiya again starts. You hear them. You hear the term, and I've said that once you hear that term get more and more mainstreamed. That's also a big giant sign. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
I throw another wrinkle on your last R, religion, though.
Sure.
I think that the concept of religion as a unifying force in a social order varies a lot from country to country. For example, the Japanese are, historically a very tightly knit country, and religion, as we understand religion, is really not important to Japanese lives. Custom is, culture is, their identity as Japanese is, but not religion as we understand it. Germans, for example, until recently, had a strong sense of being Germans, even though, divided between Protestants and Catholics, that was not really a unifying force as Germany as a Christian country. So I would say that what we need is, and you can call it religion in a broad sense, you need a national idea or a national ethos or something that inclines the people to say, we are us, we are all part of one body. And so for some nations, that is strongly religious. Poland, for example, Catholicism has played that role. But in other countries, religion isn't necessarily the biggest part of what inclines. Sometimes it's common descent, or it's language, or it's lots of other things that are the unifying ethos.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, America definitely does not have that.
No, that's the problem.
And today Russia does. I mean, Russia really is a very sort of confident and, mutually, everybody's like, yeah, we're Russians and we're with the program. And, there's a lot of unity and sort of social cohesion, which is noticeably absent here.
And that's the problem too. And that's what I come back to, why I have less hope. I mean, I do hope that after the collapse comes, which I think it will, something like in America come out. But when you start looking at the unifying force, obviously civic nationalism, the republic, my constitution, that ain't going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of common descent, you might say, okay, the English-speaking white Christian population sort of has a national consciousness, but it doesn't necessarily, because some people think only in racial terms or in Christian terms or whatever. There's no unifying American concept that encompasses all those different elements that make a nation self-aware.
Well, look, you have an American Pope now, so there's hope for that. Maybe you just become a Roman Catholic country. Just quickly, Tom Rickson, $30 Australian from says that these two blokes haven't watched the Lab and it shows. Well, not everyone can watch that. The Astrolabe by Matt Erickson. We have to get you and Matt Erickson.
I have not. You got to get me indoctrinated here.
Yeah, I never heard of it.
I will send over. I will send you.
I'm old.
That's true. Mr. Erickson is a very good dear friend of mine, and we do a show together called Network Armageddon and Electric Boogaloo on Thursdays. So you can check that out, gentlemen. We're coming up to the hour, so Charles, we kind of just miffed over a little bit. I don't know how much you want to share about your experiences being considered an insurrectionist, considering the news that's coming out of America.
What did you do exactly?
I thought it was interesting. Just really quickly, I thought it was really interesting to see Trump and them turn that narrative. As soon as I started using, I'm like, well, I mean, little chef kiss on that one to call the turn the tables a little bit. But please, sorry, Charles.
Yeah, so it was a rather exciting experience because I witnessed history and I was inside the Capitol building as a journalist. Really, that's why I went in, although I probably would have gone in if I wasn't a journalist. The door was open, you could walk in. I did. I reported on it extensively for Russian television at the time. And then I noticed people were getting arrested. And and I was like, wait a minute, this is weird. No, they're definitely going to arrest me because they already hate me. So now they just have a good excuse to do it. So I grabbed my wife and kids and we jumped on a plane and took a long overdue family visit to Russia. And we thought we would be there for maybe 2 or 3 months until all this blew over, and it dragged out for 4 years. So we spent 4 years in Russia. I'd lived there for many years before that. So it was like coming home, and it was we have an apartment there. We were perfectly comfortable. And it was actually an amazing time. So in a way, I'm glad that all this happened, because what I experienced and learned in Russia these last 4 years has been incredibly valuable to me and my family. We've all sort of benefited from being there. But it was a super exciting experience.
Maybe you can do some myth busting, because I mean, I think for a lot of people in the West, I mean, I haven't been, and I was raised in a Ukrainian Canadian household, so my our our relations with our Russian cousins were never too cheery. But maybe you can do some myth busting is on Russians and the state of Russia on the ground today.
Oh yeah, this is one of the interesting things. So the first year we were there was COVID, 21. And then, things couldn't get much worse than a war breaks out, right? And it was really, I was thinking, wow, I don't mind all this, but it's probably not going to be great economic times. But what really surprised me and confounded most observers was that Russia just seemed to like shrug off the economic burden of the war. And the sanctions, and it's surreal, ever since the war started and going on month after month after month, you have this sense that, hey, there's this horrible war happening and all these people are getting killed, and life goes on as normal, and you just didn't even feel the economic impact in Russia. Maybe a little bit in terms of inflation, but it wasn't critical, and then it leveled off. And so Russia's doing incredibly well economically, and now it took a little while, but now it's actually accelerating because it's benefiting from all this international new trading partners that they've acquired and built up, and BRICS and all this stuff. So you feel like you're in a booming economic environment. You get like a China feel about it.
How much of that is the way you feel about it in Moscow? What do you think it's like out in the rest of the country, rural areas and so forth?
Well, I traveled a lot because I worked as a journalist these 4 years. I actually specialized in Orthodoxy, and I went all over the place and saw all sorts of places. And no, it's a nationwide phenomenon, and it's happening in the Far East. It's happening in Tatarstan, which is very central, sort of almost Urals. The country has so much ground to gain economically that it's actually quite easy to play catch up with just applying Western technological developments. So it's doing, the country is doing really well, and they can't unemployment is zero basically. They can't find enough able-bodied people, and they have to ship in freight loads of people from Central Asia to meet the demand. And
or North Korea
very
now
much
as well.
get the sense of like a booming economy,
right?
Building everywhere, new roads, fancy cars, shops full, cafes full, restaurants full, hotel prices high. I mean, it's all like, you don't get a sense that there's an economic problem there at all.
It seems like the big Green Deal lie that's finally blowing up all over the place as well is playing well into Russia and many places' hands, especially Russia being an energy giant. Just reports this morning, Japan has broken any kind of embargoes on Russian oil, citing critical energy needs. Because as I said before, Japan's economy is in free fall now, and especially their rice market. But they just need energy. They need cheap energy as much as possible, and they're just saying, screw it, we're buying Russian oil. And I think you're going to start seeing breakouts all over the place like that. The European Russia trade has always been sort of backdoored anyways, and this whole Syria thing is, I don't think, worked out the way they thought it was going to work out. Maybe because Turkey is not as a great agent for the West as they. I try to warn you, Europeans. I try to warn you multiple times, but you never want to listen. So, but no, that's interesting. That's good. It's interesting that it's kind of a China vibe, because, of course, China and Russia have their special relationship, and it kind of cuts against the grain of what we keep hearing.
There's something else I would add, Jason. It's very interesting that the war had a very positive effect on Russian society. Also, I don't think anybody saw that one coming. So a lot of the liberals scrammed, especially the young men who didn't want to fight. And so it's sort of like, Russia in just one fell swoop was willing to get rid of a bunch of morons and idiots who had been making life difficult forever. To sort of and people really came together, and there was this sense of we're in this together, and we're unified, and we're strong. It became much more patriotic. It became more religious, more Christian, more conservative. And another interesting effect is that the troops who are at the front and cycling through the front, they're getting radicalized in a good way, in a conservative, patriotic, no BS way. And the Putin or the government is doing a very smart thing, and they've talked about this publicly. They're listen, we understand that fighting for your country at the front really changes a man and makes some sort of reorder his values. And we're going to make a determined effort to move these guys into government and move these guys into social influence. They're going to come back. They're going to have access to better educational opportunities, financial advantages, and they're going to be invited into better jobs in the economy and in bureaucratic positions. And they want to move this generation of men who went through the front into Russian, have more influence in the society. And these guys are coming back with a really no BS. If there was a lot of Russians were super materialistic, and all they wanted to do is get a Mercedes and take holidays in Egypt. And I think once you've been at the front, that changes a lot, and you realize there are other things that are more important. And so that's a very interesting phenomenon too. So it's funny, nobody saw it coming, right? But in fact, war can oftentimes brace a country. It can stimulate its economy in a very strong way, and make people sort of come down to earth and be better people. And I very much noticed that in Russia while I was there.
Yeah, so I've always said the corollary to the vengeful son is the spirit of the prodigal son. To return, repent, and begin the process of redemption. And that's something that's, I think, been missing across the West, and maybe in the world in general, as we come out of this 60-year weirdness of hyper-liberalization, very hyper-feminization of values, and this sort of weird inversion. So, yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Well, you've discussed the vengeful son concept in an American context. Where would the prodigal son fit into an American context?
By people returning, repenting, and redeeming.
I'm saying, but do we see any of that? Where would that manifest itself in America, and is it at all visible?
Orthodox numbers are exploding all over. ROCOR is exploding. I mean, exploding, right? In relative terms. Yeah. Well, look, that BBC report didn't come out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
I follow a lot of online Protestant stuff, especially on YouTube, and watching that. They're freaking out. legitimately.
Mhm.
And because now we're getting reports just in the chat, I've been seeing some people talk about, and God bless everyone in the chat. Some people are saying that their local parishes are bursting. I know the one here in Australia that I go to, tiny as it
Mhm.
is, you know, when you get 25, 30 people showing up, it doesn't sound like a big number, but from 0 to 30 is huge, especially
Mhm.
in a practice like Orthodoxy, which is not easy. It's
Mhm.
not just show up, there's a smoke machine, you get dunked in the water once and you're good, and
Mhm.
you know, it's a glee club. It's fairly serious business. So to submit yourself, to get humble, and to go
Mhm.
through that return part is an act of humility. And I think that might be the big key here, is
Mhm.
that while there's going to be a lot of people who are very prideful and who want to just tear things down because they think that they can build it their way and it'll be great and beautiful because it's them. There's going to be I think I see a strong hopefulness of a lot of younger men and
Mhm.
older men like myself and others who are turning to the church like Buck and saying we need to get humble. We have to understand that we don't know what we think we know, and we need to start submitting ourselves to the church. Um, and
Yeah,
that
they talk a
wave,
lot about that in Russia too. Like spiritual leaders talk about the necessity of repentance,
right?
um, which is also humbling yourself, right? And that unless Russia repents, Russia is not going to be successful in the long term. And you see that concept constantly discussed and brought up, and it's an important thing. And I don't think you see a lot of repentance in America, even among serious Christians of the
Mhm.
non-Orthodox variety. There's still a sense of kind of you know triumphalism, or we're still the best,
Or
you know.
prosperity gospel or Christian Zionism or whatever. I mean, what's interesting is the most um, zealous sectors of American Christianity are often the most goofy,
Yeah,
in terms of what they believe. You get mega churches who are being promised, health and wealth and whatever it is, and it's all happy clappy stuff, but there's no root to it. I mean,
Right.
there are conservative, decent Protestant churches, judged by that standard, but they're not really big, and I don't think they're the ones that are bursting at the seams.
and they don't talk about repentance as far as
No,
I
no,
know. I
No.
think they talk about, no, this is the way to understand the Bible,
yeah,
or
yeah,
this is, we
hmm
got to like get
yeah,
tough or get
hmm
strong or fight or
yeah,
something, but they're not on their knees.
Well, I think it's because they think of being baptized as an endpoint. So they think that that's the
blindly,
repentance, right?
yeah.
You get dunked, you've done your repentance. It's like no. It's continuous. Like the baptism is the start, and
Yeah, this is a
that's
start. Yeah.
now you have the real work ahead of you, because it's spiritual warfare, and I think that's kind of what
hmm
people don't want to accept because it means that it's not about them anymore, and their relationships and what it's doing for them. It's got to be what it's doing for other people. Saint Seraphim of Sarov once said,
hmm
a peaceful heart saves 1,000 souls, and I think that's to the point of Russia. It doesn't mean that 100% of people have to be Orthodox. It would be nice if they were in some way, shape, or form, but maybe that's not the whole point. Maybe if the
hmm
people who are truly maybe it can attract really true believers in the best sense, and their modeling and their presence starts to have effects that people don't even associate with Orthodoxy, but yet it's
hmm
benefiting everything else, and maybe that becomes the cultural repentance. Although, and we will get to this if we can get Father John Whiteford on fairly soon. We'll talk about
hmm
the resurgence of Sovietism in Russia. I don't know. Did you see any of that, Charles? We won't touch too much on it now. I know we're over the hour mark, but
No, just what Jim told me at dinner, that there
Yeah.
was
yeah,
a statement out recently. Yeah.
But did you see
yeah.
any evidence of like,
Oh, resurgence of Soviet
yeah, like Stalin
ideas in Russia.
cult or anything like that, or?
Um, yeah, there's a definite push
Yeah.
coming from the Kremlin, and
hmm
people aren't.
Yeah.
It's not clear how much Putin is on board with
hmm
it and who
hmm
it's coming from, but it's an attempt to glorify the Soviet sort of ethos
hmm
and pump up communism, and you can see it's a deliberate thing coming from the government.
Mhm.
It's not organic or spontaneous, and that is worrying. Yeah, and that is noticeable.
Well, can I offer maybe a thought on that, a brief one? Is, say what you want about Stalin, but during World War II and even the lead up to World War II, he did allow a partial, and indeed encouraged a partial rehabilitation of patriotism, Russian patriotism, not disguised as Soviet patriotism, but not just communism, internationalism, and all that.
Orthodox patriotism.
Well, yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
And given that the Russian government has made their victory in World War II, the fight against Nazism, et cetera, so much of the we can win attitude in this war, maybe in a sense, the Russian government is doing sort of the same thing, taking an alien and suppressed ideology that they know still has some resonance with the population and trying to allow it more space because we want to mobilize that sentiment in the same way that Stalin mobilized patriotism, even under a communist regime. Well, we have a non-communist regime, but they feel they need to tap into some of that legacy from the great victory that they keep pointing to as their inspiration in this war. Maybe that's their calculation. Yeah. I don't know.
Maybe we will. Yeah, go. Sorry, Charles, please.
It could be their calculation, but it's a terrible one because it's bringing back basically a demonic ideology and horrible people, and they're making dumb mistakes really because they're, like, for example, when they're retaking territories in the Ukraine.
Yeah, and putting back the Soviet names.
Yeah, and they're giving them names of communist heroes of the past of these towns.
Well,
and you're
Artyomsk instead of what did the Ukrainians called it instead of Artyom? So he was just Comrade Artyom. It was his communist conspiratorial name. Petrov was some commie. He was not. This is not an old name.
Exactly.
I mean, if they went back to the names like Yekaterinoslav or something, I'd be happy.
And in Russia, I worked a lot with Spaz TV, and they cover very much the Christianization, the spread of orthodoxy among the troops, and it's absolutely fascinating what they've discovered. That, for example, when a unit becomes Orthodox in the sense that they adopt the name of an Orthodox saint. They start showing the banner of Christ, the Christ's head with the cross behind it. And when a lot of the troops become baptized and there's a chaplain there and they're praying together and so on, their casualty rate goes way down. And they're much more successful on the field, and they're also much more motivated to fight. And if you've got a unit that's like hearkening back to the Soviet heroism of World War II and the atheism and all that, it doesn't work. And the military is discovering that, hey, we should encourage this orthodoxy because it's actually helping us on the battlefield, which was absolutely fascinating. I found.
God is here in all ways. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Charles, please let the people know where they can get your content.
Sure. You can find everything connected with me at my Twitter account, which is C Bausman, or just search Charles Bausman. I'm the only one on there.
That's Bausman.
I'll put links in the description. I already have your links to your Substack as well. So please, everyone, go and check out Charles's fine work. And of course, I try to warn you. By James George Jatras, available in all the places. You can get your hands on that.
You wouldn't listen.
You wouldn't listen. I tried so hard, but you wouldn't listen.
I mean, you got to tell them people 14 times.
15's too much, 13 too little, 14 is the number.
14.
Please. And of course, thank you so much for everyone sending their hard-earned dollars over in Super Chats. The best way to do it, of course, is go to hit that Streamlabs link, either way you're watching this live or in the future, and send me some money to keep the lights on and Mrs. MIRONCHUCK happy. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be back next week. And of course, more shows coming up this week as well. Stay tuned. I am Jason MIRONCHUCK, and it's later than you think.